Once again, we have another ban list, and this time around we have 25 different cards that were affected from it. You'd think with all this, the format would drastically change, but I don't know if that's true. What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Cards and Coffee. I'm glad you're here because we're just coming out of one of the most diverse formats we've seen in some time. And now, while decks like Infernoble and Mathmech are now dead, this format is still looking as diverse as ever. I actually just posted a video on the pros and cons of diverse formats, so if you're interested in my take, make sure you guys go check it out after this. But even though Tier Limit lost its millers and Pearly, Rescue Ace, and Unchained lost consistency, I still expect these decks to be around the top cuts of tournaments. Plus, decks like Mananium and Labyrinth basically went untouched, so it's pretty easy to see that this format is looking very similar to the last. At the end of this video, I'm going to give you guys my honest take on the best decks of this format, so make sure you stick around to the end, that way you guys can see. But to highlight some of the cool things that happened on this list, we got Harp Horror back, the Floodgates are in shambles, plus we also got Ib and Snatch Steal back as well, which, hot take, I don't think they're going to change the format that much. They're both really crazy cards, but not every deck can play Ib, and Snatch Steal to me is just going to be another solid card you guys can throw in your side deck. I am glad that Pink is at 2. I wish it was at 3 like Desires and Upstart Goblin. I'm very excited to see Upstart at 3, but as long as Droll and Lockbird's in the format, the card's going to be very lackluster. Sure, this gives a power boost to something like Sky Striker, but until we get all the new support that's coming in the future, I'm not sure this deck's going to really break that Tier 2, Tier 1.5 category. Starter to 3 is really cool. I've always been a big Sprite fan, but unfortunately, the best variants of the deck going forward look like they're going to be Runic builds, which really you only play one of that card anyway. Sure, you could be playing something like the Melfi variant, but again, we'll see how things play out, but I would imagine being able to play Runic cards is just one of the better things you can do. Infernity also sounds scary, but Bestials really chew that deck up anyway, so I'm not really too worried about it. But Terra top to 2 has me so excited. There's so many different things you can do with it. This works so good in any of the Phantom Knight variants running around right now. Plus, it also gives support to the Goblin archetype, which comes out in the future. But if all these changes show us anything, it's that Konami had the future in mind when making this ban list. As mentioned, we're getting the Goblin archetype that gets buffed by the Terra top. We're also getting Transaction Rollback, which again, Labyrinth went completely untouched, and that deck will abuse it like crazy. Plus, we're getting all that extra fire support, so not only is Fire King going to go up to the next level, but Rescue Ace losing 2 of the starter cards really changed nothing for the deck. I mean, heck, even right now, you could just cut the 2 Airlifter and throw 2 more Dark Witch in. The deck's perfectly fine. And we'll see in time how that all plays out, but without wasting any more time, let's hop over to the tier list. Alright, so right out the gate, this is what I would expect the format to roughly look like. I didn't include every deck that could possibly make its way into the meta. As the format develops and tech cards start changing, I could definitely see some of these decks move up or down on the tier list. Right out the gate for the tier 1 decks, I expect Rescue Ace, Labyrinth, Manadium, and of course Pearly to be some of the most dominant decks this format. Both Pearly and Rescue Ace really just lost a little bit of consistency, and like I said, you could add 2 Dark Witch to replace the Airlifters. Plus, when you add Populace and Bonfire into the mix, it gains the consistency it just lost from this ban list. And of course, Labyrinth and Manadium basically went untouched, but now Labyrinth has better matchups all around. Tier Limit's a lot weaker without the Millers, and Unchained now is a lot less consistent, which, again, those were 2 of your hardest matchups for the deck. And of course, we get Transaction Rollback in the future, so this deck is easily going to be one of the best, if not the best deck of the format. The only downside to this deck is there's a lot of things that you can side to help counter against it. As far as what's the absolute best, I don't know. My gut says it's gonna be Rescue Ace because, again, Lab can be countered pretty easily, but I definitely think you shouldn't sleep on any of these decks, as well as any of these tier 1.5 decks, because they're easily just as good, just some small things about them that keep them from being the best decks. The Fire King deck is already very solid, but once we get the new fire support, I could easily see this moving right up to tier 1. Unchained loses a couple of consistency cards, plus now you're gonna have to play a second Shayama to make up for the loss of Shavara. That way you can still make your DDD exceed. The deck's very strong, and so that's why I still think it's a solid choice. And as far as the Runic field spell, this just symbolizes any of the Runic piled decks. I think the Runic cards play really well against Labyrinth. Plus, now that Rescue Ace has 1 Airlifter, I guess there's a chance you might banish their one of, but again, they can recycle it with the field spell. The Runic cards are always going to be good, so we'll see how they play out in this format. Mikanko lost nothing, and again, Acid Golem is horrifying. Centurion is still a solid deck, it just has its own flaws. I have both of the branded decks here. They're very solid. Not only is the Chimera one a very toolbox deck with all the non-engine, but of course the more pure build can also puppet lock you, which is always going to be something strong. I don't know how I feel about Dragon Link. I honestly want to put it in tier 2 because I just feel like Vanadium just does what this deck wants to do, except better. But every time I sleep on Dragon Link, it always comes to bite me in the butt. But again, if also the Labyrinth matchup is very popular, this deck really thrives because of all the main deck Bystials. Tier 2 has Vanquish Soul, a solid deck, but nothing crazy by all means. The deck lost Tikaboo as well, so that definitely hurts. Tier Lament obviously lost its Millers. I think there's something there, but I'm not that confident, so right now I have it at tier 2. We just got another Unicorn. Kashtira has proven itself in the more recent YCSs as a pure deck to still be able to hold up with the decks in the meta, and the Rika Sun Avalon deck still is very playable while it's not as crazy as it used to be. I definitely could see this stealing some tops here and there. Sky Striker is still one of my favorites to play, but whether or not it has place in this format, I really don't know. The spell cards are obviously very strong, but Droll Lockbird was popular last format, and since Vanadium's still around, I definitely see it in a lot of players' side decks. Upstart to 3 is really crazy, but we have the Phantom Knights and the Orcus cards down here kind of together. I really like the Phantom Knight deck, especially with the Horse cards, but now with the Orcus engine you could throw in it, there might be something there. Or heck, maybe you do the opposite and you just play a very small Phantom Knight package. I don't know, I definitely think there's something there, but regardless, it looks to be a tier 2 deck at best. I am very excited about Orcus, but with Bystials and Crows and so many other things in this format, I don't know if it's its format right now. Obviously, no need for explanation. These decks are dead, and as I mentioned, these are all the cards coming up in the future that could definitely shake up the meta. So again, nothing too crazy, and there are other decks that could easily be thrown into the mix, but just like I didn't mention some of the other cards that came off the ban list, I just felt like all this was the most relevant going forward. But that's gonna wrap things up for today's video. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We are so close to 10K, so if you haven't subscribed, please go ahead and do it. I'm really excited to start testing out all these decks and of course make more profiles for you. But once again, thanks for tuning in, and here's hoping to see you on the next one. Peace.